Such a pretty song from Zusha, who have been on AT Live before. Hareini Mechavin from their new album Open the Gates just came out a short time ago, and that song is such a beautiful idea. Behold, I seek to make myself a throne and a vehicle for the divine presence, right? That you should make choices in this world that would encourage God's divine presence to be manifest in this world. Obviously, God is here, God is everywhere, but that God should feel at home among us and reveal God's self among us. We need to elevate the world a little bit through our personal choices every day. How's everybody doing? It's a Sunday. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Sunday evening? Patrice in Utah, Sharon in Lebanon, New Jersey, Yehuda in South Carolina, Karen in Northern California, Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Duke and UNC going to the Final Four. Very exciting for North Carolina. John in Maine, Renee in Indiana, Franco in Trieste, Italy. Great to have you with us from across the pond, Franco. Paula in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Melissa in Great Neck, Yosef in Massachusetts, Guy in Ohio, Lucy in Minnesota, Sandy wishing everyone a good evening, Aoife in Florida, Yitzhak in Kansas City, Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody. We're on page 19 of Tractate Yevamos. We are in chapter 2 discussing the second Mishna. So we're continuing to go over this case. And let's sketch it out one more time because it's just going to come up over and over again. Now, the question that we're examining, when a Yavama, a widow of a man who dies childless, comes up before her Yavam, the surviving brother, or Yevamim, brothers, right? There might have been multiple brothers. For Yibum, right? That they would get married and that their first child would become the heir of the brother who died. Or Chalitza, the alternative mitzvah that would release them from Yibum. When she comes up before Yibum, before her Yavam, but before they perform Yibum or Chalitza, what is their relationship? They're both obligated to perform either Yibum or Chalitza, unless there's other circumstances that would remove that obligation. But if that obligation exists, and they neither perform Yibum nor Chalitza, there's some kind of a bond there. And how substantial is it? Right? That's what the rabbis have been arguing now for a few days. And they're using this situation to examine it. Now we'll sort of sketch it a little bit differently, right? There are three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, right? And then let's say the young one, Benjamin, born a little bit later, right? And Reuven was married to Miriam, okay? And Shimon was married to Dinah. All right? And then Reuven died. And so Miriam came up for Yibum before Shimon, right? Reuven died before he had children. Now, the whole thing, the trick is here that Benjamin's not born yet. He's not born yet. So Miriam comes up before Shimon for Yibum or Chalitza. Let's say he's going, so he dies, so now she comes up for Yibum, and they're gonna perform Yibum. Or that she's up before him for Yibum, and they haven't done anything yet, but there's this bond that we're talking about, and we're not sure how substantial it is. And then Shimon dies. Very tragic family. And then Benjamin is born, Binyamin is born not after Shimon dies. Rather, he's born after Reuven dies and before Shimon dies. That's important. He's born after Reuven dies, but before Shimon dies. And then he's either born before or after Miriam becomes Shimon's wife through Yibum. But the question is, if Shimon dies and they're in this state where they didn't perform Yibum, and there's this possible connection, right? The Yibum bond, that they're obligated in Yibum, but they haven't done it yet. And then Shimon dies, right? So Miriam never became Shimon's wife. Now, do both of these women come before Binyamin for Yibum? Since they never married, then one opinion is, well, really what this is Miriam, who was Reuven's wife, never became Shimon's wife. Reuven died before Binyamin was born. Therefore, this is the wife, the widow, of a brother with whom Binyamin never coexisted because he was born after Reuven died. He has no obligation toward her. She is excused from both Yibum and Chalitza, and therefore he should perform Yibum or Chalitza with Dinah, who's the Yevama to this Yavam, just because of the relationship to Shimon, since all three guys are brothers. If they did perform Yibum, okay, so says Rabbi Shimon, and then it's a different Shimon. So then Shimon died. Says Rabbi Shimon, okay, it doesn't matter that she was once married to Reuven. The fact is, when Binyamin was born, Shimon had two wives. So now there are two wives, and he performs Chalitza or Yibum with one of them, either one, and then the other one is released. If it was the state that he was born when there was only this kind of relationship in existence, if we say that the Levirate bond, the Yibum bond, is substantial, then it's like she was married, and according to Rabbi Shimon, he would choose Chalitza or Yibum with either one of the wives. According to the rabbis, or at least some opinion, because this is not a substantial bond, we look back to this bond, so therefore he's excused with her. If they formed the bond, some of the rabbis will say it's still because she was once married to Reuven. He has no obligation because it's a brother with whom he did not coexist. And because she then became a co-wife with Dinah as the co-wife of one who's excused, she is also excused. So there's no Yibum or Chalitza with either of them for Binyamin. This is the case that we're going to keep examining in a lot of different permutations. If it gets confusing, just keep listening. It might get clearer later. So the Gemara proceeds to clarify Rabbi Shimon's position in this matter. Now, granted, in the case when the second brother first performed Yibum and subsequently the third brother was born, right? So Shimon married Miriam and now had two wives, Miriam and Dinah, when Binyamin was born. It is possible to explain that when the third brother found her, i.e. when Binyamin was born, he found her in a permitted state because when he was born, Miriam was already the wife of Shimon. Because when he was born, she was already the wife of a living brother with whom he did coexist. But if Binyamin was born and subsequently the brother performed Yibum, so when Binyamin was born, nothing had happened yet. She was before Shimon for Yibum, and there may or may not be substance to this fact that they're obligated to each other, but they haven't done anything yet. But if he was born and subsequently Shimon performed Yibum, what is the reason that Rabbi Shimon renders her permitted? At the time that Binyamin was born, she hadn't performed Yibum yet, right? So she would have really only been the Yevama, the widow of this brother with whom he did not coexist, so she should be excused, exempt. It must be that if she then married him later, and that Rabbi Shimon So let me just read it. But if he was born and subsequently the second brother performed Yibum, what is the reason that Rabbi Shimon renders her permitted? And the Gemara answers, one must say that Rabbi Shimon holds that the Yibum bond, the obligation to perform Yibum, is substantial, and the bond itself created a tie of kinship. Moreover, a woman because then Shimon died before they ever married, let's say, one must say that Rabbi Shimon holds that the Yibum bond is substantial and the bond itself creates a tie of kinship. Moreover, a woman with a levirate bond, right, an obligation to perform Yibum, but they didn't do it yet, is considered like a married woman. Since there is a bond between the Yevama and the living brother, it is as though she were already married to him. Accordingly, she is for the new brother like the wife of his brother with whom he coexisted. She's like the wife of Shimon, even though they never performed Yibum. The fact that they had this obligation to each other renders her as if she married him, according to Rabbi Shimon, and that's why when Shimon dies, Benjamin has the same obligation toward Miriam as to Dinah, and he can choose which one of them, because it's only going to be with one of them, but he can choose which one to perform Yibum or Chalitza, and the other one is just fully exempt. Now, Rav Yosef strongly objects to this analysis of Rabbi Shimon's position. Now, that in the case of a levirate bond and a levirate betrothal together. So this levirate betrothal was this weird thing that we examined yesterday and the day before, where when they have this obligation to perform Yibum with each other, and before they performed Yibum with each other, or Chalitza, Shimon says, okay, Miriam, I will marry you. He hasn't done it yet. So this is levirate betrothal, meaning they already have this bond, this obligation to perform Yibum, and he says he's going to marry her. So it says if it's a betrothal, which in some opinions is meaningless because they're already bonded more than a betrothal would be, but according to other opinions is real. And so here, so Shimon says, I will marry you. He still hasn't done it, but now we have both the obligation to perform Yibum and the promise of Yibum, the betrothal, as it were. So says Rav Yosef, now that in the case of a levirate bond plus levirate betrothal, Rabbi Shimon is still uncertain as to whether she is similar to a married woman or an unmarried woman. Is it necessary to say that by levirate bond alone, she is not like a married woman? If so, how can the Gemara assume that for Rabbi Shimon, the levirate bond alone gives her the status of a married woman? It's a little bit confusing because we, didn't do the full analysis today that we had done yesterday. But where we're picking it up is they're trying to figure out exactly what it is that Rabbi Shimon holds. So what is the proof that this is Rabbi Shimon's opinion? As we learned in a Mishna on page 31 of this tractate, in the case of three brothers who were married to three unrelated women, and one of the brothers died, and the second brother performed levirate betrothal with the widow, and then he died, then these women, both the first wife of the second brother and the betrothed widow of the first brother, must perform chalitza, and they may not enter into yibum with the third brother. And what is the reason that the wife of the first brother is not eligible for yibum? As it is stated, and one of them dies, and her brother-in-law will have intercourse with her, and will take her to him to be his wife, and consummate the levirate marriage, Deuteronomy 25:5. And from here it is derived, she who is subject to a levirate bond with a single yavam, enters into levirate marriage, and not she who is subject to a levirate bond with two yevamim. This woman requires levirate marriage due to the death of the first brother, and also due to the subsequent levirate betrothal requires levirate marriage following the death of the second brother. However, Rabbi Shimon says, let him enter into levirate marriage with whichever he wishes and perform chalitza with the second. Rabbi Shimon does not accept the homiletical interpretation forbidding a woman who is subject to two levirate bonds. The Gemara explains his opinion. Rabbi Shimon does not allow him to take both in yibum. Why not? Perhaps the levirate bond is substantial, and combined with the levirate bond to the second brother, the woman might be considered to be already married to the second brother, and then these two women would be two Yevamos who come from a single household, i.e. from the same husband, And everyone agrees that only one wife from each household may be taken in Yibum, as the verse states, right? So in other words, just to use this chart for a second to help clarify a little bit what we're saying here, instead of not going through the whole case exactly, but the simple explanation of what they're saying here is if you've got simply, right, if you simply had two brothers married to two sisters, like the way this was at the beginning, and both of these brothers die, okay, then both of these women come before Binyamin for Yibum, because they're both separate widows of separate brothers. But after Reuben dies, and then Miriam becomes a co-wife with Dinah, both wives of Shimon, and then, and that's how Binyamin finds them when he's born, and then Shimon dies. So at that point, they're two wives of the same man. And now they don't both come before him for Yibum. Only one of them can come before him for Yibum. They can work it out which one they want to do it, but he cannot marry both of them. Only one. Whereas if when he's born, there's just two separate marriages and both brothers die, then both of those wives could become his wives. And if you would say that by Torah law, indeed, one of them may be taken in Yibum and thereby exempt the other, then this was prohibited only by rabbinic law. This would be a rabbinic decree due to the concern lest those who were not aware of the details mistakenly say that in general, if two Yevamos come from two households, meaning there were two brothers with each one had one wife, and then one is taken in levirate marriage and the other is exempt without anything, that would be a mistake, right? They don't want people to think that this situation is simply like there were two brothers, each had a wife, both brothers died, and then this third brother should pick one. No. The only reason that the third brother is picking only one of them is because they didn't die at the same time. First one died, and his wife then became a wife of the middle brother. That middle brother then had two wives, then he died, and then the two wives come before the third brother for Yibum, and he can only take one of them. But it's because of the sequence that the older brother died first and his wife became a wife of the middle brother. But this cannot be. That this decree that, you might have thought that, let's just keep going. But this cannot be, as Rabbi Shimon's reason is mentioned explicitly in the Baraisa that we're discussing. There he does not state that this is a decree of the sages. Rather, his reason is due to the question with regard to the strength of the levirate betrothal. Specifically, whether the status of marriage is achieved by levirate betrothal or not. Right? That Reuben died, and now we have that situation where Miriam comes before Shimon, right before Shimon dies. So Shimon alive. And this is what we're talking about. So she comes before Shimon he's married to Dinah. Miriam comes before Shimon for Yibum, and he says, I will marry you, but hasn't done it yet. So that's that levirate betrothal situation that we're talking about. So Rabbi Shimon is due to the question with regard to the strength of the levirate betrothal, specifically whether the status of marriage is achieved by levirate betrothal or not achieved by levirate betrothal. As it is taught in a Baraisa, Rabbi Shimon said to the rabbis in explanation of his opinion that one of the women could enter into levirate marriage with Binyamin in this situation. If the levirate betrothal of the second brother is indeed levirate betrothal, and is considered as a fully valid marriage, then the third brother is engaging in relations with the wife of the second brother when he takes her in levirate marriage. That is, if the levirate betrothal by the second brother has the same status as full marriage, then she becomes the wife of this second brother, and all previous connections, the fact that she was once married to the oldest brother with whom Binyamin did not coexist, irrelevant because when Binyamin came into the situation, Miriam had already become Shimon's wife. He had 2 wives, and she's a co-wife with Dinah. And even if there was only a betrothal and not a full marriage, according to this opinion, Rabbi Shimon would consider it like a full marriage. And that's why Binyamin can choose which of those women, Miriam or Dinah, he will perform Yibum or Chalitza with. But if the levirate betrothal of the second brother is not levirate betrothal, i.e. he does not have the full status of marriage, then there was never in fact any connection between Shimon, the middle brother, and Miriam, the widow of the first brother. And if she is then taken by the third brother in Yibum, he would be engaging in relations with the wife of the first brother, the one with whom he did not coexist. Therefore, there is no Yibum. He would be violating the prohibition on sleeping with his brother's wife, which is only overridden if Yibum applies, but Yibum does not apply to a brother who did not coexist with the one who died. And from here, one can conclude that the basis for Rabbi Shimon's uncertainty is related to the questions concerning the strength of the levirate betrothal, and not whether or not there were 2 Yevamos, and that's the reason why it was strong or weak. Abaye said to him, from here you cannot prove what Rabbi Shimon's opinion was. Right? It's too confusing. There's too many possibilities of why Rabbi Shimon held the way that he held, says Abaye. Is there no difference to you between a levirate bond to a single Yavam and a bond to 2 Yavamim? Right, as we saw yesterday, if there's only one surviving brother and one widow, okay, so for sure they have a bond of some kind even before they perform Yibum. But if there were 2 surviving brothers at the time that Reuven dies, well, only one of them can perform Yibum with the widow. And so which one of the brothers is it going to be? Necessarily, that bond is not very strong with both of them because the other one could take that obligation on himself, and the remaining brother would be fully excused. So says Abaye, is there no difference to you between a levirate bond to a single Yavam and a bond to 2 Yavamim? Perhaps when Rabbi Shimon said that a levirate bond is substantial enough to render her like a married woman, this applies only when there is only a single Yavam, only a single surviving brother. If these were the circumstances of the case discussed, that when one brother died, there remained only one Yavam, a surviving brother, then because the obligation of levirate marriage would apply only to him, she would be considered his wife. But perhaps he held that if there were 2 surviving brothers, then no, she would not be considered like a married woman to this man just because they had an obligation together, as here the bond would apply to both of the brothers at once, and you don't know who she would have ended up married with, and therefore there is no substantial bond. Accordingly, Rabbi Shimon's uncertainty is with regard to the case of a levirate bond with 2 Yevamim, 2 surviving brothers. We've been on page 19a for a little while. The Gemara challenges, does Rabbi Shimon differentiate between the case of 1 Yavam and the case of 2 Yavamim in the matter of a wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? But it is taught in a Baraisa with regard to the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Rabbi Shimon stated a principle. Whenever the birth of the third brother precedes the levirate marriage, precedes this Yibum, right? So if he was born before they made this Yibum, right. Whenever the birth of the third brother precedes the Yibum of the second brother, if this second brother dies and the Yevama falls before the third brother, she does not perform Chalitza and she does not enter into Yibum. In such circumstances, she is the wife of the brother with whom he did not coexist. So according to this, they're saying that Rabbi Shimon would say that if Binyamin was born before they did anything, right? So Reuven has already died. Then Binyamin is born before they decide what they're going to do. So at that moment, Binyamin vis-a-vis Miriam, she is the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. She's prohibited to him forever, no matter what happens later. But if she has already become Shimon's wife and then Binyamin is born, so then at the moment that Binyamin comes into the world, Shimon has two wives, and it doesn't matter that she was once married to Reuven. If now Shimon dies, then she is simply the two widows, the two surviving wives of this brother with whom Binyamin did coexist, and he can perform Yibum or Chalitza with either one of them. When the birth of the third brother precedes a levirate marriage, she performs Chalitza and does not enter into Yibum. And in such circumstances, she is the wife of the brother with whom he did not coexist. But if the Yibum preceded his birth, she either performs Chalitza or enters into Yibum with Binyamin. What? Is it not referring to the case of a single Yavam? And it is taught in a Baraisa, she does not perform Chalitza and she does not enter into Yibum. Even if there is only a single Yavam, this is not considered full marriage, and she remains forbidden as the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Consequently, she who is subject to the levirate bond is not like a married woman, and the Gemara answers, no, it refers to a case of two Yavamim. And the Gemara asks, but what then is the ruling of the single Yavam? So too, one should say she either performs Chalitza or enters into Yibum, as the woman who requires Yibum is like the wife of the second brother for all purposes. And if so, rather than teaching the case when the marriage of the second brother precedes the birth of the third brother, that if this second brother dies and she falls before the third brother, she either performs Chalitza or enters into Yibum, let Rabbi Shimon distinguish and teach the distinction within the situation itself and say, in what case is this statement said? When there are two Yavamim, two surviving brothers. But if there's one Yavam, she either performs Chalitza or enters into Yibum. And the Gemara rejects this. No, the entire Baraisa is in reference to two Yavamim. There are two brothers at the time that Reuven dies, and differentiates between various cases involving two Yevamim, namely the case where the birth of the third brother preceded the marriage of the second brother, and the case where the marriage of the second brother preceded the birth of the third brother. And the Gemara asks, rather, what is the principle in this matter? If Rabbi Shimon is speaking of two Yevamim and not a single Yavam, then it makes no sense to speak of a principle, as the law is different in the case of a single Yavam versus the case of two Yevamim. Moreover, Rav Oshaya raised an objection from that which was taught in a Mishna that's coming on page 28. If there were three brothers, two of whom were married to two sisters, or to a woman and her daughter, or to a woman and her daughter's daughter, or a woman and her son's daughter, who are in each case two women who may not be married to the same person simultaneously, and subsequently these brothers who were married to relatives, right? The simple case is two brothers were married to two sisters, and then both brothers died. And subsequently both brothers who were married to these relatives, let's say sisters, both brothers died. Then those two women must perform Chalitza and may not enter into Yibum, neither one. Since they both have a levirate bond to the third brother at the same time, and he is prohibited from marrying both, they cause one another to be unable to perform Yibum. And Rabbi Shimon exempts them even from Chalitza. Okay? Here we go. Now we're saying two brothers. Reuven. Pen, come on. Reuven married to Dinah, okay, and Shimon married to Miriam, okay, and Reuven and Shimon are brothers, and Dinah and Miriam are sisters, and there's a third brother. In this case, we're not talking about he's born later, he's just there, and then they both die. Okay, so you might think, okay, well, so Binyamin should marry one of them. He should, make Yibum with one of these. He can't be married to both of them because they're sisters. But you would think that he could marry one of them, and then because he's married to Miriam, and Dina is Miriam's sister, okay, so Dina is excused from Yibum or Chalitza, but let Binyamin marry Miriam. But what they're saying is, since he has a Yibum bond, an obligation to both of them, then the fact that they both have an obligation to the same man, which is sort of like being married to him, and because they are sisters to each other and cannot be married to him, so then he can't marry either one, and he must perform chalitza with both of them. Rabbi Shimon says, because this bond is kind of strong already, and because the whole thing is not permissible that he can't be married to them, and he sort of is because of that obligation, says Rabbi Shimon, the whole thing is exempt. Yibum doesn't apply. He neither performs Yibum nor Chalitza with either of them. That's a Mishnah that's coming on page 28. Now, why is Rav Oshaya bringing it up now? And if it enters your mind that Rabbi Shimon held that the levirate bond is substantial enough to make her like a married woman, well, then let the third brother consummate the levirate marriage to the widow of the first husband to die, right? If Reuben died before Shimon died, right? So Shimon is still alive when Reuben dies. Okay, so there's nothing going on here. Well, in that situation, you would think, okay, two brothers were able to marry two sisters, so now Binyamin is just simply going to make Yibum with his Yevama, Dina, and we're going to end up in the same situation. Two brothers are married to two sisters. That should work. And if it enters your mind that Rabbi Shimon held that a levirate bond is substantial enough to make her like a married woman, then let the third brother consummate the Yibum to the widow of the first husband to die, since as soon as her husband dies, she has a levirate bond with the other brothers and should be considered to be like his wife, and let the other be exempt as a result, as her levirate bond began only with the death of the second husband. But you see, when Reuben died, right, so then there was a levirate bond with Binyamin. When Reuben died, there was a levirate bond, an obligation to perform Yibum, but there was also an obligation to perform Yibum by Shimon, right? And the fact that Shimon now has a wife and a levirate bond to Dina, that's problematic and might be cause enough to say Dina goes out with neither Yibum nor Chalitza. She could go marry some other guy, but she's out of this family because of the sister issue. So that's part of the discussion now. So Rav Amram said, what is really the meaning of the word exempt used by Rabbi Shimon? Only the second is exempt. The Gemara objects, but it is taught in a Baraisa Rabbi Shimon exempts both of them. From here it is clear that in his opinion, a woman subject to a levirate bond does not have the same status as a married woman. Rava said, in the case mentioned in that Baraisa, there were 3 brothers, 2 of whom died. Each of the deceased brothers had 4 wives who were related to the wives of the other brother, as described in the Mishnah. This case is so complicated, I'm not going to sketch it out. Just kind of listen in a meditative mode. One wife of the first brother was the sister of a wife of the second brother. Another wife was the mother of a wife of the second brother. Another was the daughter of a wife of the second brother. And another was the daughter of the son of a wife of the second brother. And when these brothers died, all 8 women happened before the remaining brother for levirate marriage. When Rabbi Shimon deemed both of them exempt, he was referring to the second from this pair and the second from that pair. That is, since one of them was bound to the third brother, her relative became exempt as a forbidden relative, and the other of the pair was her rival wife, her co-wife, in each of the cases. And the Gemara comments, Rava was mistaken about there being 4 pairs. He mistakenly understood that the Mishnah spoke of 2 brothers who married 4 pairs of relatives. Why does the Gemara assume that he was mistaken? One piece of evidence is that the Mishnah teaches the case using the expression or. And the Mishnah teaches, or to a woman and her daughter, or to a woman and her daughter's daughter, or a woman and her son's daughter, meaning that not all the pairs happen before a single Yavam for Yibum. And further, the Baraisa should have said, Rabbi Shimon exempts all four of them, i.e. the four women married to the second brother. And further, it is taught explicitly in a Baraisa that Rabbi Shimon exempts both of them from both Chalitza and Yibum, as it is stated, and you shall not take a woman to her sister to be a rival to her. From here it is derived that when two sisters are about to become rival wives one to the other, that is, at the moment that they fall before one brother for Yibum, you do not have the option of taking even one of them. Right? Even one of them. If both of these sisters fall for Yibum to Binyamin, right, because Shimon dies, if Reuven and Shimon die at the same time, for example, and now these two sisters come before Binyamin, you would think he could marry one of them and the other would be released. But no, because they're sisters and have the possibility of being married as Yevamos to the same man, that's enough to exempt both of them. You do not even have the option of taking one of them. In other words, the levirate marriage to either of them is not permitted, and therefore both are exempt, and not only the second. Thus, Rava's explanation is rejected. Rather, Rav Ashi said an alternative answer to the Gemara's challenge. If these Yevamos happen before him for levirate marriage, one after the other, indeed, it is so that the first woman bound is like a married woman, and she exempts the second. Right? So Reuven died, and then Shimon died. So first Shimon is alive. Okay, he's still alive. When Reuven dies, so now Dinah is a Yevama who can be married in Yibum either to Shimon or to Binyamin. Now, she cannot be married to Shimon because Shimon is married to her sister Miriam. So she should come before Yibum or Chalitza with Binyamin. But because there's some kind of a bond, since he could possibly marry her, and he's already married to her sister, she's excused already. And she's already out, exempt, and cannot marry either brother, says Rav Ashi. If these Yevamos happen before him for levirate marriage, one after the other, indeed it is so that the first woman bound is like a married woman, and she exempts the second, who is her close relative. However, here we are dealing with a case when both brothers died at once. Okay, Reuven and Shimon did die at the same time. So now both Dinah and Miriam, who are sisters, come before Binyamin. And what do? Here we're dealing with a case where both brothers died at once, and so both women happened before Binyamin at the same time. And Rabbi Shimon holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, who said it is possible to be precise. He held, contrary to the opinions of the rabbis, the majority, that it was possible to be exact about measurements of time. Therefore, it is possible for two things to truly occur at once, and it is possible that both brothers died simultaneously. Right? You might think that, well, okay, they both died on the same day, but one of them died before the other. Right? But somehow it happened that they died at exactly the same moment. Perhaps they were both in the same fiery car wreck, God forbid. Okay, then what? Now, until this point, the Gemara dealt with Rav Oshaya's opinion, stating that according to Rabbi Shimon's statement, even in the case of one who was born before his brother's Yibum, the ruling of a wife or of a brother with whom one did not coexist would not apply. However, Rav Papa said, Rabbi Shimon disagreed in the case where the second brother performed Yibum, and after that, the third brother was born. Right, so now we're back to that situation where Reuven, right. So now Reuven was married to Dinah, and then Reuven died. Shimon's still alive at that point. Okay, and Binyamin's going to be born later, but when is he born? So now there's a disagreement, even if Binyamin is not yet born, and Dinah and Miriam are not sisters, right? We're going back to that case. Now we're going back to the previous case. Dinah and Miriam not sisters. So Dinah performs Yibum with Shimon, and now Shimon has two wives, Dinah and Miriam. They're not sisters of each other, so this is permitted. Then Binyamin is born, right? So Rabbi Shimon would say, okay, when Binyamin is born, doesn't matter that Dinah was once married to Reuben. The fact is Shimon has two wives. When Shimon dies, he's going to choose one of them to perform Chalitza or Yibum. But this other opinion is that even though Binyamin, when he's born, both women are already married to Shimon, the fact that once she was married to Reuben is enough to say he is not going to enter Yibum with a brother's widow with whom he did not coexist. That means that Dinah is exempt from Yibum and Chalitza with Binyamin, and since they are now co-wives of each other because they were both married to Shimon at the same time, so then Miriam also exempt from Yibum and Chalitza. Very different results. All right. Rav Papa said Rabbi Shimon disagreed in the case where the second brother performed Yibum, and after that the third brother was born. However, where the third brother was born after the death of the first brother, and after that the second brother performed levirate marriage, Rabbi Shimon did not disagree. He agreed that in this case, she would be forbidden to the newly born brother as the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, right? Because when Binyamin was born, this marriage didn't exist yet. So then he would agree, right? Because all she is at this point is the widow of a brother with whom he did not coexist. As for that question that Rav Oshaya raised with regard to the apparent redundancy of the similar rulings in both the first Mishnah of the chapter and the Mishnah on page 18, it can be explained that both were necessary, meaning the second Mishnah, it can be explained that both were necessary for the opinion of the rabbis who prohibited marriage to the wife of a brother with whom one did not coexist in every case. And the difficulty raised concerning the apparent redundancy of the first Mishnah, given the greater scope of the opinion revealed in the second Mishnah, can be explained by saying that the Tana teaches the Mishnah employing the style, not only this, but also that. That is, the Mishnah follows the stylistic principle of first teaching the obvious case and continues by saying that this principle applies not only in the obvious case, but even in the less obvious case. If so, there is no need to assume that there is an additional dispute with Rabbi Shimon. Now, before I proceed, let's just take a moment and say, what are we doing here? Right? What are we doing here? Such a complicated set of circumstances and three brothers, and when was the third brother born, and when did the first brother die, and when did the second brother die, and how often is this going to come up? Why is this so important that we're discussing it day after day after day? And not only what is the ruling, but what did the minority opinion say, and how is the minority opinion different than the majority opinion, and what basis of proof did the majority opinion look to, and what did the minority opinion look to, etc. Why are these questions important and worth all our time thousands of years later when these situations don't even come up? Because the law is in the Torah. And because God knows everything and knew when these laws were written into the Torah that there would be exceptional, liminal, difficult cases in which we would have to figure out how to apply the law. And we're not going to wait until those cases happen. We're going to study the law and figure it out, even though the case is very unlikely, because we're trying to understand what is it that God wants from us. Why did God create laws that would become complicated? Because we're going to spend time studying it and getting close in on the text and getting close in on the arguments of our ancestors that went over many generations. Right? Because while we're studying this and trying to understand God's will from us, we are coming closer to God. We are spending a little time a little bit closer to God and our ancestors than we would otherwise be. So the Gemara continues. It is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rav Papa, and this is a conclusive refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Oshaya. If there were two coexisting brothers, and one of them died childless, and the second was about to perform levirate betrothal with his Yevama, but did not manage to perform levirate betrothal before his brother was born, and then the second brother died. Then the first woman goes out and is free to marry without chalitza or yibum, due to the fact that she was the wife of a brother with whom the third brother did not coexist. And the second either performs chalitza or enters into yibum. She was never the rival wife of the widow of the first brother. If the second brother performed levirate betrothal with her, and afterwards his brother was born, or if his brother was born and then he performed levirate betrothal and then he died, the first goes out and is free to remarry as the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, and the second, the wife of the second brother, must perform chalitza and may not enter into levirate marriage. And this is because, due to the levirate betrothal, she is considered by the rabbis to be the rival wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. Now we're on 19b. Rabbi Shimon says, intercourse or chalitza with one of them, i.e. the wife of the second brother, exempts her co-wife. But if he performed chalitza with the one who received the levirate betrothal, and then her co-wife, i.e. the wife of the second brother, is not thereby, then the co-wife is not thereby exempt, since possibly the levirate betrothal does not have the same status as marriage. If the second brother married his deceased brother's wife, and then he died himself, and afterward a brother was born, or if a brother was born and then he married her and died, the two wives are both exempt from chalitza and yibum. In this case, one was the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, and the other was her co-wife. The Baraisa continues, if he married his Yevamos, and then a brother was born, and then he died, both the wife of the first deceased brother and the original wife of the Yevamos are exempt from chalitza and yibum. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And Rabbi Shimon says, since the third brother came and found her in a permitted state, and she was never for a moment prohibited to him, as when he was born she was already the wife of the second brother, who was still alive, he therefore takes whichever he wishes in yibum, or he performs chalitza with whichever he wishes. We've seen that over and over. And the Gemara clarifies, the section of the latter clause of the Baraisa, which refers to the case of a brother born after the yibum, according to whose opinion was it taught? If we say it was taught for the purpose of clarifying the opinion of Rabbi Meir, it doesn't make sense, since it makes no difference to Rabbi Meir whether the yibum preceded the birth of the third brother or the birth preceded the yibum. In his opinion, under both circumstances, she was the wife of an original brother, the oldest brother, Reuven, with whom he did not coexist, and that's why he's never gonna be permitted to marry her, even if when he was born she was already married to the second brother, the middle brother, Shimon. That's how Rabbi Meir sees it. In his opinion, under both circumstances, she is the wife of a brother with whom Binyamin never coexisted, and if this were in fact taught for the purpose of clarifying Rabbi Meir's opinion, it should have combined the cases and taught them together. Rather, is it not the case that the latter segment of the Baraisa we're now talking about was meant to clarify the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, since the different parts of the Baraisa enumerate different possibilities, and Rabbi Shimon disagrees in the case when the middle brother, Shimon, first performed yibum, and afterward the youngest one, Binyamin, was born. But he does not disagree in the case where the youngest brother was born, and afterward the middle brother performed yibum. The Gemara conclude from this that Rabbi Shimon disagrees only here, as Rav Papa explained. Now the Gemara proceeds to discuss this Baraisa itself. The master said, the middle brother, was about to perform yibum with his Yevamos, the widow of the oldest brother Reuven, but he did not manage to perform levirate betrothal with his Yevamos before his brother was born, and then the second brother died. Right? So it's that original case. Reuven, Dinah and Miriam not related. Reuven died. Shimon was thinking about whether he's going to perform yibum or chalitza. He doesn't say, I'm gonna marry you. He doesn't perform betrothal. Before anything happens, Shimon dies. Okay? What then? The second was about to perform levirate betrothal with his Yevamos, but did not manage to perform the levirate betrothal with his Yevamos before Binyamin was born, and then Shimon died. Now the first woman goes out and is free to remarry without chalitza or levirate marriage, right? Because nothing happened here, Dinah can just go do whatever she wants. She doesn't need yibum or chalitza from Binyamin because she's only the widow of Reuven, with whom Binyamin never coexisted. He's born after Reuven dies. Yes. And the second woman, Miriam, performs chalitza or enters into yibum with Binyamin. Good, makes sense. And the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase "was about to," and what is the meaning of "did not manage to perform levirate betrothal"? The important issue is not his intention, but his actions. If he did it, he did it. And if he did not do it, he did not do it. Why are you talking about he did not manage to? He was thinking about betrothing her, but he didn't get around to it. He didn't do it. He didn't perform yibum, and he didn't make an act of betrothal. Rather, the correct interpretation is "was about to" means that he was about to perform levirate betrothal with her consent, and "did not manage" means that he did not manage to perform it with her consent, but instead did it against her will. So Shimon, so now they're reinterpreting this baraisa. What was happening was that while Shimon was still alive after Reuven died, so he says, all right, yeah, I want to keep this all in the family. I'm going to marry you, Dinah. Dinah says, I don't want to marry you. I would rather perform chalitza with you. I do not want to marry you. And that's where they were. He was trying to create betrothal. He did the action on his part to create betrothal, but she never consented to it. So was a betrothal created? Right? That's the question. Now you would think the answer is no. And that is the law. The betrothal was not created because she didn't consent to it, according to the majority. But there's a minority opinion that says, well, since he wanted to create a betrothal and he undertook the action that would have created a betrothal, then despite the fact that she didn't consent, some kind of a bond was created, and they were like co-wives. And then when Shimon dies, it's not going to be possible to perform yibum or chalitza as if nothing had happened. Rather, the correct interpretation is "was about to" means that he was about to perform levirate betrothal with her consent. "Did not manage" means that he did not manage to perform it with her consent, but instead he betrothed her against her will. Consequently, it is understood that this baraisa is not in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, as it is taught in a baraisa with regard to one who performs levirate betrothal with his yevama without her consent. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says he acquired her and the betrothal is valid, like a consensual levirate betrothal with his yevama. And the rabbis, the majority who disagree with Rabbi, say he did not acquire her. No bond was created. And the Gemara explains, what is the reason for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi's opinion? He learned this from the case of a yavam engaging in intercourse with a yevama. Just as even non-consensual intercourse, which is rape, with the yevama renders her his wife, as the matter does not require her consent, so too betrothal of a yevama can be non-consensual. But the rabbis learned the laws of betrothal in general. Just as betrothal in general requires consent by the woman, so too betrothal of a yevama for purposes of levirate marriage requires consent. Now, they're just, glossing over the fact that the case that Rebbe was learning from was that where just simple case, a brother died, his widow comes before the surviving brother for yibum. Normally, we've been talking about, either they want to perform yibum and they marry, and they do, or they don't want to and they perform chalitza, and they would both have to want to. But now we're hearing that, but if the yavam wants, the brother-in-law wants, and the widow doesn't, and then he rapes her, that a bond is created. Now that's horrific, right, to our modern ear, and it's horrific in ancient times too. But it's worth noting that in ancient times, women had so much less power. It was a horrifically patriarchal society. It was a much less patriarchal society that the Torah introduced compared to what was going on in the ancient world, where women had no rights at all. Because when the Torah came along and said that if a man rapes a woman, right, he marries her and he cannot divorce her, by his choice, and he has obligations to her. And that was a big disincentive for men to rape women, right? Because he was going to have obligations to her for the rest of her life. So, we have to try and understand this in the context of 2,000 years ago, not the modern analysis where, our radar just goes up immediately about how terrible it is. But still, the point for this discussion is that this non-consensual betrothal is not valid according to the majority, because any non-consensual betrothal is not valid. This, non-consensual intercourse which creates a marriage here in this context is about the Yavam and the Yevama. General laws are something, we would have to study that nuance. Now, the Gemara explains, with regard to what principle do Rabbi Yehuda, Hanasi, and the rabbis disagree? One sage, Rebbe, holds that the halakhic matters concerning Yevamos must be inferred from matters concerning Yevamos and not from other areas of halacha. And the other sage, meaning the rabbis, hold that halakhic matters concerning betrothal, in this case levirate betrothal, must be inferred from matters concerning betrothal. And the Gemara clarifies another segment of the Baraisa. It is taught if the second brother performed levirate betrothal with her and afterwards his brother was born, or if his brother was born and then he performed levirate betrothal and died, the first woman goes out and is free to remarry because she is the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. And the second wife of the second brother, and the second, who is the wife of the second brother, performs chalitza but does not enter into yibum. Rabbi Shimon says intercourse or chalitza with one of them exempts her co-wife. And the Gemara asks, to which case is Rabbi Shimon referring? If we say that he's referring to the case when his brother was born, and then he performed levirate betrothal with her, Shimon performed levirate betrothal with her after Binyamin was born, didn't you already say that Rabbi Shimon did not dispute the case where the brother was born and then ultimately Shimon performed a levirate marriage, and she would be forbidden as the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist? At the time he was born, she hadn't become the wife of Shimon yet, so she's prohibited to Binyamin because she was the widow of Reuben with whom he did not coexist. Rather, one must say that Rabbi Shimon disputed the case where he performed levirate betrothal with her and afterward his brother was born. And later, and now I'm almost done, if you have questions, get them in. Later in the Baraisa it is taught, if the third brother performed chalitza with the wife of the first brother, to whom the second brother performed levirate betrothal, her rival wife is not exempt. And the Gemara clarifies, what is the reason for this? It is because the rival wife, the widow of the second brother, has a definite legal status that requires an act to free her to remarry, as she is the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. She is the wife of a brother with whom he did coexist. Whereas the widow of the first brother, with whom the second brother performed levirate betrothal, had only an uncertain legal status, as it is not clear if she is to be considered truly the wife of the second brother by means of the levirate betrothal or not. And the principle is that an uncertainty does not override a certainty. Therefore, even if the third brother performed chalitza, since the status of the first woman's obligation is uncertain, the status of the chalitza is uncertain, as it is possible that she did not require chalitza at all. Consequently, this chalitza is not sufficient to exempt her co-wife, and this teaches that he must perform chalitza or yibum with the woman who is definitely obligated, meaning the wife, the existing wife of the middle brother Shimon, and then the other one, the widow of both Reuven, and then maybe a widow, maybe not, of Shimon. She will become exempt at that moment no matter what. That's where we finish today. Whew. Let's see if we have some questions or comments. I don't know where my pen cap is. Here we go. Okay. Yevamos 19. Sharon, since the first wife never had a child to raise up her husband's name, even if there was a yibum with the second brother, doesn't the primary responsibility remain to the first husband even if she was married to her first Yavam, meaning the middle brother. Right? Great. I think that, Sharon, you've identified exactly why the rabbis overruled Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says, the fact is, when Benjamin was born, she was already married to Shimon, and whatever obligations Benjamin have are to Shimon, not to Reuven. But the rabbis are saying, like you, Sharon, the fact is, Reuven's name was never built up. We still need to build up his name. It didn't get done by Shimon, so why wouldn't Benjamin have some obligation toward Reuven? Now, the fact is he didn't coexist with Reuven, and that's why Yibum is exempted. But since she did become a co-wife of the middle brother, then that's it. She's exempt vis-a-vis Benjamin, and she exempts her co-wife. Charles, help me understand, in the case of a Cohen who dies without a son, knowing that a Cohen cannot be married to a woman who was once married, do his brothers still need to do chalitza? A Cohen can marry a widow. A Cohen Gadol, a high priest, cannot marry a widow. No Cohen can marry a divorcee, but the cases of chalitza and yibum do not create divorce, right? They create that brother's going to marry a widow. So if he's a Cohen, he can marry a widow. If he's a high priest, then presumably it's like she's a prohibited relation. And so they're not going to do it because he's not permitted through a different prohibition to marry a widow. But that's only the high priest. So there are many Kohanim. There's only one Kohen Gadol. And I think that would answer the question. Sharon, are you implying that God intentionally made these cases confusing and complicated just to create the opportunity for us to delve into it longer? Seems really less than thoughtful. No, that is not what I'm saying. I'm saying that God knew that in the nature of humanity, things would happen, right? It's not that God was going to prevent us, now that the Yibum law exists in the Torah, that God would prevent complicated cases from happening. God knew complicated cases would happen, right? So since there would be complicated cases, because that's just the nature of things, that just because one brother died, God isn't going to step in and make sure that no other brother dies, or that no other brother dies with timing that would create complications. That's just the nature of this world, that God wouldn't intercede and stop that from happening. So then, how would we know how to apply the law when those complicated cases invariably would arise? Right? Since the law was not spelled out in the Torah what to do with the complicated cases, it's part of the system that the rabbis would have to step in and figure out those complications. And you don't want to wait till one of those complicated cases happen to start arguing about it, because there's real people with real emotions who need real answers from the rabbis what to do in that situation. At the end of the day, there is a halacha for each of these situations. Right? And, when God forbid a family faces this kind of crisis, one brother dies, then another brother dies, and they need to know what to do, they just go to the rabbi and say, what do we do? And he gives them an answer. But for that rabbi to be able to give an answer, the sages had to go through all these various permutations, and that is part of the system. And there's many laws like that. God wasn't going to step in and make life uncomplicated. So it's not that he made it complicated so we would study. It's that life would be complicated, and God didn't spell out all the answers. So it was part of the system that sages would have to come along and figure out what the law would be in complicated cases, so that real people with real emotional crises could get answers. And finally, Yosef, I'm starting to get the scenarios, but what I'm not grasping is the brother who's born later. Is the widow waiting until the new brother grows up? Is there something I'm missing? That could happen, right? That could happen. That was exactly the case in the Judah and Tamar story. There were two brothers married to Tamar. He died. She married the second brother. He died. And now there was a third brother, and let's say he was already born, even when the first brother died. but he was very young. And so now they're waiting for this brother to get old enough to perform his obligation or not. Now, in all these cases, and as we've seen in modern times, they never do yibum. They always encourage chalitza, right? And even back then, they mostly encourage chalitza. And particularly, they're going to encourage that case. Now, what we don't know is how old does a boy have to be to perform chalitza? How long does she have to wait? Can they just step in and perform chalitza sort of like as the agent of the boy? Can his guardian say, okay, we're going to just perform chalitza so this poor woman can go out and get on with her life? We don't know. We haven't encountered that question yet. But otherwise, the fact that he's young, is just inconvenient, and they're going to have to wait until he gets older so that he can do either yibum or chalitza, unless somehow an agency can be established by his guardian and they could perform the chalitza earlier. I just don't know the answer to that. But I can see, why it's a difficult question. Okay, that's what I've got. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Monday night, 6 p.m.